Oh, okay. This meeting is being recorded, so I think it's doing it automatically, Lopa. Let's give everyone one more minute, shall we? Almost 2 o'clock now. Great. Should we start? Might as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Thank you to everyone for joining for today's Circulation AJ's URO EQA meeting. It's on the hottest day of the year so far. There's no other place I'd like to be, I think, than in the EQA meeting. So let's kick off, shall we? Okay, first of all, we're using Slido again, just like several other EQAs. So if you can use the QR code, but there is a QR code on every Slido question. So if you miss this, don't worry at all. So first of all, if we can just check that the Slidos, everything's working well. So if you can try and answer this question, favorite color. It seems to be working. We've got 26 participants. So I'm just gonna, it seems to be working well. Yep, that's fine. Okay. One thing I would mention is the health board in Cardiff decided in their infinite wisdom to block Google. So I'm having to run this off my 4G connection. So fingers crossed everything will work well. Otherwise I'll have to hand over to yourself, Lopa, but so far it's working well. Can you still hear me okay, Lopa? Yeah, great. So in summary, the Circulation AJ has been going for since it was opened back in March. We've had a few more participants this time, out of a total number of 512 registered participants, a higher number than usual have done the EQA, so 94%. In addition to that, we had some trainees and overseas, and the usual exemptions were in place. No participants exempted for more than 2 cases. Right, and I thought it would just be quite interesting just to show you the variation of where people are in the overseas category. So we've got people joining the EQA on almost well, every continent, Antarctica. So that's very useful. So obviously only the registered UK member and island can vote. So overseas and trainees obviously are unable to vote. So shall we just kick off? AJ1, first of all. So this was a fairly straightforward question. It was female 48 who had a radical nephrectomy for what was a clear cell RCC. It was, the information we were given was a G2T3A. And then there was an additional sort of incidental finding in the medulla. And what we're told is that the main tumor was 38 millimeters. We're not told how big the renal medulla lesion was. So on low power, we've got the section of the cortex and medulla and renal pelvis. And we can see 2 lesions, one slightly larger than the other, both in the renal medulla, quite well defined, look unencapsulated at low power. And then on medium power, again, we can see it's a sort of biphasic lesion, entrapped tubule surrounded by the loose connective tissue and stromal cell proliferation. Doesn't seem to have any concentric cuffing of these tubules. The stromal cells appear to be fairly independent. And then again, on higher power, there's no evidence of any atypia, both in the stromal section and in the tubular section. So it looks fairly bland. No mitoses, with bland proliferation. So just going on to the comments, 31 people wanted a bit more immunohistochemistry. Some people would send it away for a second opinion. Some thinking not suitable for EQA. And I just included a few selected comments, not many, 33 out of 480 is not many. So again, some people just wanting to do a bit more immuno. Some didn't think it was suitable for EQA. The immuno that was suggested was to rule out some of the other differentials that I'll go on to.
How your voice is crackling.
Very briefly. Is that a bit better?
Yes, yeah, better now.
Yeah, sorry. I think there are a few, if you keep on telling me now and again that your voice is, is breaking up, we'll do our best. So a couple of people had included some of the differentials in their comments. So here we are. So a wide variety of opinions, but renomedullary interstitial cell tumor appears to be the most popular option. So almost 92% included that. And then 1.7% is about 8 people. So 8 people, 7 people had a differential of the tumors. So if I can go through very quickly, just to show you the difference between this renomedullary interstitial cell tumor lesion and the other lesions. So a MEST, obviously postmenopausal ladies, a mixture of cystically dilated tubules of varying size with, again, variable stroma. Again, I didn't think it looked like this lesion. The metanephric stromal tumor is thought to be a differential of renomedullary interstitial cell tumor. It is found mainly in kids. And there tends to be a little bit of cuffing around the tubules. So didn't think that was in place in this case. Just had a message from Sona. This will be recorded, so we will upload it to YouTube. So don't worry if you miss anything or my voice goes. Renal dysplasia, our pediatric pathologist kindly helped me on this. It doesn't really look like it. Again, it's a pediatric diagnosis with some rare cases in adults. But in those adults, the background kidney often shows a very scarred chronic pyelonephritis type picture. So again, didn't look like ours. And then the juxtaglomerular cell tumor, again, doesn't really look like our tumors, these eosinophilic cells with the sort of spindle cell polygonal nuclei. Some of the other things, pecomas, AMLs, again, don't think it fitted with that. So apart from possibly the metanephric stromal tumor, possibly, which you could sort of be generous perhaps, I think everything else doesn't seem to fit. It seems to fit very well with renomedullary interstitial cell tumor. So just to, if you could say, is it scoreable? What I would say, we're not going to put these slides scoreable or not on every case, because some cases will be barred or scoreable. But in certain cases where there's a lot of differentials, then we will put this slide in. The other thing I would say, to keep the trigger happy people from just pressing the wrong answer, on the next slide, when you do score it, it's 0, 0.5 and 1. So in that order, rather than 1, 0.5, 0. So just to be careful when you do score. I'm gonna finish that. So I think most people. So let's move on to the scoring first of all. Okay, so now then, what's happening here? Oh, there we go. So first of all, yeah. Let me go back. Apologies for that. Just going to keep on going. I think when we reach about 50 people, I know only 100 people had logged in at the time, so Renal dysplasias is 0. Inflammatory pseudotumor 0. Tenephric adenofibroma. ATN. And juxtaglomerular, yep. Nephrogenic rests 0. Okay. As far as the questions go, we're going to do our best. Sona's going to look at the questions that are submitted, but I think we are pushed for time. And if you do have a question, we can always address it after the EQA, but we will do our best to answer some of the important ones as we go along, but we obviously can't address everyone. So that was a fairly straightforward question. AJ2 is the next one. Again, hopefully this should be a straightforward one. There's some of the couple up and coming are a bit controversial. So we've got distal ureterectomy for a stricture, and we're told quite usefully that it is a history of previous bilharzia. Macroscopic description is very detailed. We have had some special stains. The ZN is negative, but no immunohistochemistry. Again, low power, 4 sections of ureter with a bit of fat surrounding it. And even at this power, you can see some sort of nodular aggregates in the wall. So there's something going on. Medium power, again, we can see these well-defined areas that some people are calling granulomas. But there is this very hyalinized eosinophilic material that, again, some people did mention amyloid in the differentials. But there appears to be some lesions within this collagenous tissue, and on higher power, you can actually see the ova, the parasites, surrounded by a very dense inflammatory cell infiltrate. And many people also commenting on the fact that there's florid calcification with a granulomatous proliferation. So they do look like schistosomiasis. So, and just to prove the background urothelium was negative, some people had commented on that. But yeah, there's no evidence of any CIS or dysplasia, or sorry, neoplasia. Very few comments. Some people commenting on the quality of the slide. And again, not many comments apart from just confirming the diagnosis. I agree that it was a slightly thick section, and perhaps they could have been crisper, the parasites, but I think most people did find them fine. So again, very good concordance, 99% favouring schistosomiasis, and some people either as a differential or just as a straightforward primary diagnosis, just calling it a foreign body reaction. So it's fairly easy to score this one. So if I leave scoring, so hopefully the slide or everything works well. So you can see 20. Can you still hear me okay, Alopa?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, we can
Good.
hear you.
Excellent. Good. So we got 65. That should do it. So schistosomiasis, yep, gets a 1 point. Foreign body reaction gets a 0. Yep, that's fine. Good. So we'll crack on because
how will we've got 236 participants.
236. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Thanks very much for that. In the Zoom session today.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think there was about 340 had registered. That's excellent. So number 3, again, hopefully a straightforward question before we move on to the more contentious one. Young chap, 27 years old, with a right testicular mass. And this was described as a testis with some grey-white tumour nodules. Largest was 2.9 centimetres. And very usefully, we're told the immunoseekit, PLAP OCT34 positive. So low power, well-defined tumour. Again, apologies, just there's a little bit of a defect at the slide. There's some staining issues here. We couldn't remove that, unfortunately, but I think most people can still see the main lesion. And on medium power, one starts to see the cellular infiltrate. There's quite nice septi separating these nodules. There's chronic inflammatory cell infiltrate within the septi. So it's looking very much like a seminoma. These polygonal cells, polygonal nuclei with prominent nucleoli, and reasonably well-defined box-like cell membranes, and light to eosinophilic cytoplasm. So, yep, I think this had very good concordance as well. Not much in the way of comments, 26 comments in total. To be fair, many did comment on a secondary diagnosis, which is GCNIS. We're looking into, well, the secondary diagnosis often is a bit redundant and doesn't give much information. So we'll look in the future whether to keep that in or not. But yeah, a few people did mention as a secondary diagnosis the GCNIS, but this was a good concordance question. Some people thought there was a suggestion of non-seminomatous elements, but I think the majority, just one person favouring that this was something else, or was predominantly seminoma with another non-seminomatous germ cell component. So I didn't see anything like that, I've got to say. So I think they should be fairly straightforward. And again, this is the secondary diagnosis that people have put in. This is not scored, I should mention. So let's try and score this so we can get these 3 simple cases out of the way. So 50, yep, I'm going to stop the scoring there. That seems pretty conclusive. So again, seminoma gets 1, mixed germ cell tumor 0. That's fine. Okay. So let's crack on. So this one, case 4, AJ4, is a kidney tumor. I thought this was an excellent EQA case, but the scoring doesn't quite support that, or the supplementary question doesn't quite support that. So we did have half the question asking about a diagnosis, and then the secondary half the supplementary asking about grading. So macroscopically, it was quite a large tumor, 10.1 centimeters, and then various descriptions. So that's the capsule and sinus. So again, we've got a large tumor, quite well defined, not encapsulated, but it seems to be pushing towards the renal pelvic calyceal system. And doesn't seem to be invading it, but getting very close. Medium power, you start to see the clear cell nature of this tumor and the very rich sinusoidal vascular pattern. And again, on high power, certainly this part of the tumor, you can see it's clearly a clear cell RCC. It's got a very rich vascular blood supply. The nuclei in this location look as if they're quite small nucleoli, possibly grade 2. But again, we don't have, certainly on the Leeds website, we don't have a adjective slider. And that's something I can discuss in a second about this case. So it's just on morphology and experience and sort of a guesstimate really based on this part of it. But if we zoom out then and go to another part of the tumor, just the top right, incidentally, then there seems to be another sort of area, and this part of the tumor on the right side of the screen looks low grade, but there's clearly a difference in area. And you start to zoom in, and you can really see there's some very pleomorphic cells with very eosinophilic cytoplasm. Looks as if it's got an inclusion body, so it looks like a rhabdoid cell, looks like a rhabdoid differentiation, albeit in a very clear cell RCC background. So again, very pleomorphic nuclei, some of them. And I suppose this wasn't an isolated one field. You could see several areas of this in that section. So again, some very pleomorphic cells. So again, the majority of this, 90% I would say, would be low grade, but this would be certainly grade 4 based on the rhabdoid, the pleomorphism. So, and of course, we're grading on the worst area, aren't we, in renal cell cancer. So if we go back then, so the 2 questions that we wanted was the diagnosis and the grading. And we had several comments on this case. So the first one sort of sums it up really. There were multiple ISIP grades, 2, 3, and 4. And most people did see the rhabdoid differentiation, but not everybody did, and there were various reasons possibly for that. So several people, and it's difficult for us to find a solution to this, several people did comment on the server speed and how that had affected their assessment of this case. So a lot of people had said, I almost missed them. I almost missed the sort of high grade area, but just about found it. So we are looking to ask Leeds and possibly also revisiting Oxford as well. Again, we'll discuss that at the end. Trying to use a different way of, if we are going to ask for grades in the future, and obviously objectives is important in renal cell cancer, to include a definitive objective on the actual digital slide. Now, in this case, several comments were, there's no objective slider, so I can't grade it. But of course, the fact that there was a overwhelmingly high grade area, that trumps then obviously the lower grade. So it's automatically grade 4 then. So the best comment of the day, I think, is this person here who's keeping it real, getting up early on a Sunday, kids are watching CBBC, and still finding the server speed very slow. I have to say, I went on this case several times, not because I'm a sad person, it's just to test the server speed at different times of the day, different days. And as we're getting closer to the end of the EQA, so that Friday when it closes, and it did differ, but there was no rhyme or reason about how quickly or how slow the server speed would go. So I'm afraid it was a bit hit or miss, but it's difficult for us to, other than asking people to, if they do have server speeds, to try it again on another day and then before submitting their answers. But I know some people obviously are pushed for time. We have to do this EQA quickly. We have to submit it as soon as possible. So I do sympathise. So we will look at possibly revisiting to add a third server, such as going back to the Oxford, in addition to Pathportal, in addition to Leeds as well. But again, we can have a think about that. So many people found the diagnosis fairly straightforward. So 96.6% for fairly clear cell. Chromophobe, it didn't really look like chromophobe, I've got to say. It looked like a bog standard clear cell. The NOS is a little bit non-specific, and it didn't have that sarcomatoid look about it. So if I could just score this part to start with, so see what, hopefully this will be a straightforward one. So we've got 30 people, 38, 40. If we can get to 50, that should be fine. Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. So clear cell RCC, yeah, overwhelmingly correct. And then chromophobe, again, most people think scores a 0. Renal cell carcinoma NOS, another 0. And sarcomatoid, a 0. So good, so that's as expected. Now then we come to the grading. Now, I thought it was a great case. So if you saw the rhabdoid cells, clearly it made it a grade 4, but I sympathise that the server speed can let this EQA down. So there's a wide variety of grades, and it's impossible. You can't join one together. So it's impossible to score this at the end of the day. So I think the not applicable were the ones who said the server speed is stopping you from actually grading it. You can't grade it. So I think, unfortunately, grade 4, which looks like the correct answer, slightly the main one, we can't score that. So I've just put it in for confirmation. So if you could, so if it is scoreable, I'd like to see how we can score it, but I don't think we can. Okay, let's finish that. Yeah. Oh, only a few people still think it's scoreable. So yeah, let's crack on with that. So we've got, again, 2 quite tricky questions to come. So I'd hopefully like to finish this half before Q2. That's the plan. Again, AJ5, 68-year-old female. This was a TURBT specimen. First tumor resection. We're not told anything in the history about any other pelvic malignancy, any gynae malignancy, for example. But I will come to the comments in a second. Just show that there's multiple fragments, and then we're given a long list then of immuno. We're not given the actual immuno slides, just the list of positive and negative. So it's positive for PAX8, CK7, CA125, racemase, high molecular weight cytokeratin, 34B212, weak napsin A. So, and then some spotty ones, CK20, and then some of the other GATA3, P63ER, W2 negative. Okay. So low power. There are multiple fragments of tumour, some background urothelium as well, but tumour within these background bladder sections as well. On high power, we're starting to see a rather sort of small papillary / villus little architecture, possibly some tubules at this power. And again, this is confirmed then as well.
Howell, sorry, your voice is breaking up again.
As well, but there's other infiltrate places. Just check. It says my connection is unstable.
Your voice is
it did
cutting
mention
off
that my internet connection was unstable. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's better.
Brilliant. I'll have to rely on Mr. Vodafone. Still okay, Lopa? Still okay?
No. It's breaking up again.
Let's. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Jump in if I'm breaking up and you can't hear me.
Yeah.
So tubular papillary architecture, rather atypical in places. This is the lamina propria nodule. So this was the sort of the infiltrated bit, but it did infiltrate down towards the base of that section. And we do start to see areas of moderate atypia, certainly, and mitotic activity as well. So more atypia in this section. Now, the majority of the cells had a rather light eosinophilic cytoplasm, but if you did look in certain areas, there were clear cell areas, although granted not barn door, but they were there. So some of the clearing of the cytoplasm. And again, more clearer cytoplasm. So we've got an infiltrative tumor, areas of clear cell differentiation, tubular papillary architecture. A lot of people had several comments on this, and understandably, some wanting a further opinion from another specialist pathologist, more immunohistochemistry, some thinking it's not suitable for EQA based on the clinical history. And again, many comments, probably the most comments in total. So 114 comments, again, the majority wanting to know if there was a previous gynae tumor, so gynae malignancy. So several people thinking it's a difficult case. Several people thinking it's metastatic from the ovary. And this was the sort of majority of the comments that said that, oh, it could be primary, but I would exclude a secondary malignancy from the gynae tract. Although we're not told, if you like, if you play the EQA game, we're not told of any other tumour elsewhere. Again, morphology favours a papillary adenocarcinoma, some thinking it's a renal cell cancer. Sorry, Lupe, did you want to raise, you've raised your hand, sorry.
No.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's it.
that's fine,
Oh,
don't worry. Don't
right.
worry. As long as you can hear me, that's the main. So if we go on then to the scoring, so clear cell adenocarcinoma of the urinary tract, we have had one case like this not too long ago, actually. It had to be thrown out in the end, but 82.7% have favoured that. 8.5% favoured metastatic tumour. Now that corresponds to 50 people in total. So what I did was I went into the answers of those 50 people and looked to see how many had put metastatic tumour and what sort of comments had they put. If they put a comment, you know, or if they'd put it as a differential, so for example, 6 people had put clear cell adenocarcinoma of the urinary tract as a differential with metastatic tumour. So they may have given clear cell adenocarcinoma of the urinary tract 0.7, and they may have given, 7 points out of 10, and metastatic tumour 3 points out of 10, something like that. Other people had just plumped for metastatic tumour and not mentioned anything about clear cell adenocarcinoma of the urinary tract. So nephrogenic adenoma, again, yeah, this is the main differential of number 1, but this was quite an infiltrative tumour. It had mitotic activity. There's certainly areas of atypia, which you can get in nephrogenic adenoma, but mitoses are not usually found. Some people, adenocarcinoma NOS, perhaps non-specific. The endometrioid carcinoma of the urinary tract is a little tricky one. Technically, my understanding is, I'm not a gynae pathologist, but clear cell adenocarcinoma of the urinary tract is a type of adenocarcinoma of Müllerian type. So is endometrioid carcinoma of the urinary tract. Now, some people have written down adenocarcinoma Müllerian type without subclassifying it as clear cell or endometrioid. So perhaps, you know, those 2 cases you could view as sort of lenient, you know, sort of, if you want to mark it correct, that's fine, but I'm going to leave this one because there's so much of a differential. I'm going to leave it open to all the participants to vote. A clear cell urothelial carcinoma is a recognized differential of number 1. Again, I'm going to leave you to vote on that one, not trying to dissuade you. NOS, probably not. The urachal adenocarcinoma, again, there was so many differentials that it's unlikely to be the last 3, I think, so number 10, 11, or 12. But I think clearly we've got one answer which scores. The metastatic tumour people, if they put the number 1, they will get percentage of the answer correct as well. I don't think number 3 is correct, but it's up to you to score. And I would possibly, with the Müllerian type tumours, be lenient because it technically is a type of Müllerian tumour. So let's just to give you a quick rundown on the entities. Uncommon, obviously. It is a primary urinary tract tumour, usually found in the urethra. And Müllerian precursors, possibly Wolffian duct remnants, possibly urothelial origin, nobody's quite sure. But again, clear cell variant, glycogen-rich urothelial carcinoma, nephrogenic adenoma, one of the differentials, but obviously we're given quite a big chunk of the tumour here, aren't we? So we can see its infiltrative nature and metastatic tumour because the immuno is quite similar. So that's the differential. It's quite a nasty tumour to have. So I think it is scoreable, but I'd like just your confirmation, please. Well, let's wait till we get to 70 because it's, or 70 or 80 because it's quite a contentious one, this one. Okay, so, okay, we might as well wait till we're 100. Yeah, good stuff. So it is scoreable, and let's see what people make of the scores then. So 30, 40 people at the moment. So, okay, let's kick off. I think that should do it. So clear cell adenocarcinoma with urinary tract gets a 1. Metastatic tumor, to be fair, yeah, 0.5, because many of the people did write a long comment in the free text box. Yeah. Nephrogenic adenoma 0. Carcinoma NOS 0. Endometrioid is 0. Okay, just. Yeah, okay, glycogen rich is 70% is put a 0. TCNOS, yeah, 0. Urachal is a 0. Glandular differentiation, yeah, is a 0. And nested is a 0. And micropapillary is a 0. Good, okay. The others, yeah, 0. It's its other name for this tumor is adenocarcinoma Mullerian type dash clear cell type. I think that's it. So that's fair up. But the person hadn't mentioned clear cell type in their answer. So yeah, it's being lenient. So primary serous carcinoma of the urinary tract. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that. I'm not sure. I'll have to check with Murray. I don't think that lesion exists, but primary serous carcinoma of the urinary tract. Anyway, right. This is the last one, hopefully, of the contentious cases for the first part. Anyway, so we've had 3 fairly straightforward cases, 3 a bit more tricky. So this is a young chap, 16-year-old, with a right occipectomy specimen. There's a tumor, fairly small tumor, 10 millimeters, and we're given a wide variety of immunohistochemistry. They're positive for inhibin, calretinin, vimentin, SF1. You can possibly see even before seeing the slides where this is heading, and negative for certain markers as well. So, okay, let's look at the low power. So it's a low power shot of the testis with a cellular proliferation towards one edge. It's reasonably well defined but unencapsulated, and it looks as if it's growing around and entrapping certain seminal vesicles at low power. Okay. So medium power, again, we see this very cellular proliferation which surrounds these seminiferous tubules. And just with the eye of faith, you do start to see certain sort of little follicles, possibly calexin bodies. They seem to be sort of radiating around a little central area. But higher power, they're fairly bland tumors, they're fairly bland tumor cells. No necrosis, no atypia, no mitotic activity. They do appear to have, even at high power, little grooves that, okay, the picture isn't great, it's a bit out of focus, but they were there, I think, although not in every field. So, okay, let's see. This created a lot of comments as well and interest. Seek further opinion, yeah. Not suitable for EQA, that's a fair enough response. There were 49 comments. Some thinking, well, there are 2 sort of divergent opinions, very rare, not suitable, great case. We did contact, I emailed the submitting pathologist to ask whether FOXL2 mutation had been performed. I think it was going to be performed now, but I haven't heard the result yet. But I don't think that's going to affect the scoring. today anyway. So we had some people straightforward answers of adult granulosa cell tumor, some as a sort of differential with a long discussion in the comments box. An anonymous testis tumor specialist. So I'm not sure who that is, but I think I do. But just saying it is a difficult case. And I realized that several of the comments had mentioned that this is a rare thing. They don't see it every day. And, you know, we should bear that in mind when we're marking this. So, yeah, the world or the next classification of sex-called stromal tumors may change. And it talks about a mixed pattern with low risk, and there's a move to subclassify or classify granulosa cell tumors after mutation analysis. So others wanting more mutation analysis. So I think, yeah, refer this to Prof. Burney. Several people had mentioned that in their comments. So I think the good thing about the answers here is nobody's called it a germ cell tumor. Everyone has called it some variant of sex-called stromal tumor, of which there are multiple types here. Now, if you think of the pedantic way of scoring this, would you say, oh yes, 1 and 2 just about reach 70%, 72, 73%. Yes, that's fine. But this is an uncommon tumor. It's a rare tumor. Mutation analysis is now part of the diagnostic workup, so we don't have that information. The other thing that we want to bear in mind, it was submitted to the EQA, submitted as a mixed sex-called stromal tumor. That was the preferring diagnosis. So I would tentatively suggest that certainly 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, you can make a case because it's a rare tumor that we should be extremely lenient and score them as 1. If you want to think of 6 or 7 as possible sort of maybes, malignant Leydig cell tumors, I didn't think it looked like one of those, but even a juvenile type granulosa cell tumor, maybe if you're feeling generous, you may give that a 1. But it's a difficult case, and this is one where yes, 1 and 2 just about reach scoreable as granular cell tumor NOS, an adult type. But I think we need to be a bit more lenient on this. But I will let the audience decide. So is it scoreable? I have to ask that question. And I'll leave as much, because this is a tricky one, as many people as they can to click the button. Okay, so yes, just about 71%. Yep. So let's try the scoring then. See if the hot weather make people feel generous. Okay, we're up to 92 at the moment. All right. Once it hits 120, I might. Okay, I don't think we're going to get much more than 118 there. So let's see. So granular cell tumor adult type, fair enough. 1 granular cell tumor NOS, really 18. Yep, that scores 1. Sertoli cell tumor, 1 just. Sex-called stromal tumor, basically NOS, scores 1. Leydig cell tumor scores 0. Okay. Granular cell tumor juvenile type, half a mark. Okay. And Leydig cell tumor malignant, yeah, it did not look like that. Yeah. So 81% scored 0. So, okay. Good stuff. So if I stop sharing now, Lopa, I think it's just quarter two. So luckily my internet connection just about worked.
I'll just start sharing my screen.
I'll mute myself now, okay?
Oops. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, it's on presenter mode at the moment, yeah.
Okay. Just one sec, just loading okay. So yeah, so hi, I'm Alopa, and I'll take you through the next 6 cases. So the first case, AJ7, a 38-year-old female who presented with a mass in the upper pole of the right kidney, and you had H&E sections of renal core biopsies. So this is one of the first few times that we've had renal core biopsies, and that's all thanks to digital pathology. The immunohistochemistry information provided was that the tumor was diffusely positive for cytokeratin 7, and the larger eosinophilic cells were positive for cyclin D1. So you had 2 cores of tissue, and there was lesional tissue present at the ends of each of the cores. The rest of the cores were basically just renal parenchymal tissue. The tumor was solid. There were a few tubular areas and maybe some papillary areas, but predominantly solid architecture. And the tumor cells were predominantly clear. There were some pale eosinophilic cells, but largely the tumor cells had a clear cell morphology. The tumor was low grade, the nuclei round to oval, small nuclei, no obvious, no prominent nucleoli as such. So overall, a low grade morphology. You also had numerous foamy macrophages interspersed in between the tumor cells, and there was also some brown pigment present here and there. But what was striking about this was focally in places, you had a biphasic pattern. And what was characteristic about this was that you had these glomeruloid or alveolar or organoid structures, and the inner lining of these was the clear low-grade cells, but the central portion or the lumina were filled with compact nests of very eosinophilic large cells. So now these larger cells had a somewhat squamoid morphology, you could say. They had abundant cytoplasm and large round nuclei with prominent nucleoli, but also present within, if you looked close enough, also present within some of these large cells were lymphocytes. So the larger cells also exhibited emperipolesis. So coming to the comments, you had actually quite a few people thought that this case was not suitable for the EQA. So we had 24 participants saying that. And there were about 50 to 60 saying they'd like further opinions or immunohistochemistry. Looking at the free text comments, so we had a lot of free text comments, and generally everybody pointed out that this was a biphasic pattern renal cell carcinoma, which is essentially a variant of papillary renal cell carcinoma. And we've also been told that the recognized terminology for this tumor is biphasic squamoid alveolar renal cell carcinoma, rightly so. We had quite a few quite lengthy educational comments, which were a big help to us. And there were also some discussion in the comments about cyclin D1 staining other renal tumors. So now, the biphasic pattern is a recognized morphological pattern by the WHO. And the WHO refers to it as biphasic pattern with squamoid cells. But yes, in literature, this has been called as biphasic squamoid alveolar renal cell carcinoma. And that's because of the architecture that you see, the organoid or alveolar or glomeruloid structures, which have two cell layers, essentially two cell types within it. And these are known to be a variant or within the spectrum of papillary renal cell carcinomas. Very often, these tumors exhibit emperipolesis, and cyclin D1 is expressed in the larger cells. So, cyclin D1 staining, you can see about 50% of clear cell RCCs that come up with cyclin D1 and oncocytomas as well. It's as high as 50%. A quarter papillary RCCs can stain for cyclin D1. Chromophobes rarely pick up cyclin D1. But what is characteristic about the biphasic papillary RCC is that the cyclin D1 only stains the larger eosinophilic cells, and the low-grade clear cells are negative for it. So the staining is restricted to the larger cells. Now, coming to our pre-meeting analysis, so we had quite high consensus in that about 90% of us went for either squamoid papillary renal cell carcinoma or papillary renal cell carcinoma. So I'd like the audience to consider a full mark for these two options. And then there were about 14 participants who went for clear cell papillary renal cell tumor, which is fair enough actually, because tumor was low grade, it had a clear cell morphology, it was diffusely cytokeratin 7 positive. But the biphasic architecture, which is specific to these tumors, is not something that you would expect in a clear cell papillary renal cell tumor. And these are benign tumors. As of now, they're considered to be benign in the WHO. And what you were actually looking at was a papillary RCC, essentially, which is known to be malignant. So I'll let the audience decide on which way to vote on that one. And then oncocytic papillary RCCs. Now, these again fall in the spectrum of papillary RCCs. As of now, even though they are molecularly slightly different with the KRAS mutation, but their morphology is completely different from what we had. So you get these very prominent papillary architecture, you'll get oncocytic cells, and you have reverse polarity with the nuclei arranged towards the apex. So that as well, I'll leave the audience to decide on that one. Though papillary RCC, but not the morphology doesn't seem to fit as such. Then oncocytic neoplasms. Now, oncocytic neoplasm can show a spectrum of clear to eosinophilic cells, and barring the oncocytoma, they are positive for cytokeratin 7. But again, this biphasic, very organized sort of characteristic morphology with organoid or glomeruloid structures is not something that you would see in an oncocytic neoplasm. Now, TFEB altered RCC. So we had two participants opting for that. So this was a young female, 38-year-old, and TFEB altered RCCs are known to have a biphasic pattern. So you can have these, but the morphology is reversed. So the larger eosinophilic cells are on the outside, but the low-grade cells are on the inside, and they surround hyaline basement membrane material. And overall, these tumors have a high-grade morphology. We definitely had a low-grade looking tumor here. Papillary adenomas can look like this. There's one or two participants opting for that, but the diagnosis is essentially based on the size, and these are benign lesions, as we all already know. Clear cell sarcomas, these are pediatric tumors. Morphology looks different, so that doesn't fit. Mucinous tubular and spindle cell carcinomas as well. We didn't have any of those three components in that. Eosinophilic solid cystic. The eosinophilic cells can look a little like what we had in our eosinophilic cells, but you would get basophilic stippling in these. And we didn't have a cystic component with hobnailing. So having gone through the entire list, let's move on to our scoring now. So is this case scorable? So I think we've got about 100 participants voting, so I'll just move on. And yes, the case is scorable. Then let's move on to the scoring. Okay, so we've got 100 again. So squamoid papillary RCC scores a 1. Papillary RCC scores a 1 as well. Clear cell papillary renal cell tumor scores a 0. Low-grade oncocytic, a 0. Oncocytic papillary, a 0. Oncocytic neoplasm, 0. Renal cell carcinoma chromophobe, 0. TFEB altered, 0. Papillary adenoma, 0. Clear cell sarcoma, 0. Mucinous tubular, 0. And eosinophilic solid cystic, 0 as well. Great. So that now brings us to AJ8, and the 76-year-old male post BCG for bladder TCC underwent a check cystoscopy and some biopsies were taken. So we had 4 biopsy fragments here, and even at lower magnification, you can see that there is a papillary lesion there. So looking closely, you've got your papillae there, and they appear to be lined by a single layer of cuboidal cells. All the cells look quite bland. There is some multilayering present. In addition, within the subepithelial tissue, you've got these tubular structures, and these again seem to be lined by the bland cuboidal epithelial cells, which you saw along the surface. There's quite a bit of inflammation in the subepithelium. Though generally there was no atypia, there were some focal areas where I thought there was a little bit of atypia. Still the single layer, it was moderate, I would say. The nuclei appeared smudged. You didn't really see pleomorphism or mitotic figures. So in view of the inflammation, I'd say this was reactive atypia. And looking at the comments, about 30 people would have wanted immunohistochemistry to confirm the diagnosis. But otherwise, generally, everybody seemed happy with the information that we provided. We didn't really have too many comments on this one because straightforward case, more or less everybody seemed to have got the diagnosis. So everybody went with nephrogenic adenoma. Some would have liked Paxate and WT1 for confirmation. Someone thought there were some atypical features, and there were a few who thought that this could be polypoid or papillary cystitis. So very high consensus, almost complete agreement, nephrogenic adenoma or metaplasia. About 6 to 7 participants said polypoid cystitis, and 1 each said cystitis cystica or giant cell cystitis. So these are all benign lesions essentially, but just different entities. The original diagnosis, it was called as mesonephric metaplasia, which is a synonym for nephrogenic metaplasia. And the pathologist reported that the tubules were positive not only for cytokeratin 7, but for P63 and GATA3 as well. So, I'm sure most of us, most of everyone of us are aware, GATA3 can actually show a high percentage of positive staining in nephrogenic adenomas, almost 40%. So this is something to keep in mind just to avoid a misdiagnosis with urothelial carcinoma. And some rare nephrogenic adenomas can also show P63 positivity. So I'll just skip this bit because we've got such high agreement, and move on directly to the scoring. So, so I think we've got about 85 or 86 people responding, and we've got a consensus of, so nephrogenic adenoma scores 1, polypoid cystitis scores a 0, cystitis cystica scores a 0, and giant cell cystitis scores a 0 again. So then that brings us to the next case now. So AJ9, a 20-year-old male who presented with a neck mass, and this was reported as a metastatic germ cell tumor. Post chemotherapy, he underwent a retroperitoneal node dissection, and you had a section, H&E section from a paracaval node. No immunohistochemistry was provided. So this is what was provided. And as you can see, the lymph node has been completely replaced by a tumor which has a very glandular and cystic architecture, though there is some residual lymphoid and nodal tissue present at the edges of the section. So that's your nodal tissue present there. The tumor was composed of these glandular and cystic spaces. There was some fat and fibrous tissue also. Some of these cystic spaces were lined by keratinizing squamous epithelium with no atypia. Then you had some gastrointestinal type of epithelium as well, adipose tissue there. And you even had respiratory epithelium in places, some more soft tissue components there. In addition, there were these smaller tubular or glandular sort of structures. But if you look closely, they had mucinous epithelium with some goblet cell change present. And some of these showed cytological atypia, but I'd say this was moderate atypia. You didn't really have marked pleomorphism, and neither did you see any evidence of invasion as such in any of the uh, areas with the atypia. In addition, there were some areas that looked quite compact and condensed and had a blue appearance, but this was just stromal condensation with admixed inflammation that was surrounding some of the smaller glands. There was no obvious neuroectodermal tissue present. So generally, I think most people were happy with the information and the blocks and immuno stains provided. So as far as the free text comments are concerned, we had a lot of people saying metastatic teratoma or metastatic germ cell tumor in the comments. And I think the dilemma was that because these two diagnoses were not present in the diagnosis drop-down list, which was an oversight on our part, uh, so most people, I think, were divided, and some went for postpubertal teratoma by itself, and there were some others who went for metastatic disease. Now, from those who went for metastatic disease, we went back and looked at the free text comments for these participants, and apparently they'd all either put in metastatic teratoma or metastatic germ cell tumor in their free text comments. So, we discussed this, and between us, we've agreed that we'll combine the two diagnoses. So we'll combine teratoma postpubertal and metastatic disease, and we would like to request the audience to score a 1 for that or a full mark for that. So in addition to that, there were some who mentioned malignant transformation. There was someone who thought there was possible neuroectodermal components, but as we've seen, there was no definite evidence of either of these in the sections that we had. So that's the pre-meeting report. And as you can see, about 95% agreement for metastatic disease and post-pubertal type teratoma. There were about 8 participants who said mixed germ cell tumor, predominantly post-pubertal teratoma. So I'll leave that to the audience to decide on that one. Then there was about, I'd say, 6 people who thought somatic malignant transformation, which as we went over, wasn't really, which doesn't really fit with what we had in the section there. And the others were also essentially the similar metastatic teratoma or germ cell tumor. Then teratoma prepubertal and teratoma prepubertal dermoid cyst. So we had about 5 participants going for that option, but that doesn't really fit because these are benign lesions. And what we saw was essentially a metastatic tumor to a lymph node. So I'd say that doesn't really fit with our diagnosis here. And there was one person who said monodermal teratoma, but we had mesenchymal and epithelial tissue in our section. The original diagnosis was metastatic teratoma. So keeping that in mind, let's move on to the scoring. Is this scorable or not? Okay, so we've got about 100 responding and everybody says, yes, it is scorable. So let's kick off the scoring then. Okay, got about 100 participants who responded. And teratoma postpubertal and metastatic disease scores of 1. Mixed germ cell tumor, predominantly teratoma. So we've got a split vote there. And mixed, yeah, 0.5 for that one. Then teratoma with secondary malignant transformation gets scores a 0. Prepubertal type teratoma scores a 0. Monodermal teratoma scores a 0. And prepubertal teratoma dermoid cyst also scores a 0. So AJ10, then a 65-year-old female who presents with a renal tumor. And you had a section from a nephrectomy specimen, and the macroscopic description provided was that the tumor had a solid lobulated and tan-colored appearance. Immunohistochemistry, the tumor was diffusely positive for cytokeratin 7. Racemase and RCC were positive, and the CD10 showed focal staining. Neuroendocrine markers were negative, and the mucinous material within the section stained for Alcian blue. So this is the section that you had, and as you can see, there was renal parenchymal tissue at this end. You had a fairly well circumscribed tumor there. The tumor was largely solid, so that's just a tissue defect there. And we did have some comments pointing that out to us. The thing is that this is such a great example of something that you don't see very often. So between us, we didn't really want to miss the opportunity of adding this to the circulation. So we just went ahead and added this case to the circulation. Now, looking at the morphology at a higher magnification, so you had areas where there were these closely packed, very compact, rounded tubules. And as you can see, the tubules were lined by these cuboidal cells with eosinophilic cuboidal cells. And in general, overall, the tumor has a very low-grade morphology. There were quite a few mast cells seen in between these tubules as well. Then there were some areas, like towards the center of the tumor, I think, where you had elongated tubules which appeared to be anastomosing, branching, tufted. So, and these were seen within a very prominent mucinous background. And again, you've got some more mast cells there. And then you also had a third component, which was besides the mucinous background and the tubules, which was the solid, very densely cellular spindle cell areas. So you had fascicles and sheets of spindle cells, and they were all just seemed to be seamlessly blending or merging into each other. The thing to note about the spindle cell areas was they all had this low grade morphology. So you didn't have any high grade features, no cytological atypia, no conspicuous mitotic figures, and no obvious necrosis as well. So in general, most people seem to be happy with all the information that we had given. Only one person four people said not suitable for the EQA, and one person said the quality of the slide was unacceptable. And all the comments were that, yes, this is a mucinous tubular and spindle cell carcinoma. Someone pointed out that there was probably there was probably a little more atypia than they would expect for a MTSC, but this could be an artifact of the digital scanning. There was a lot of discussion about RCC positivity, and people said that this would be unusual to be positive for RCC. And we also had a lot of comments from members asking to see the mucin stain. So mucinous tubular and spindle cell carcinomas, they are morphologically and immunohistochemically very similar to papillary renal cell carcinomas. However, molecularly, the molecular profile of these tumors is very different from the papillary renal cell carcinomas. And that's why in the WHO classification, these tumors have been listed as a separate category in the other tumors section. Something to be aware of is that the spindle cell morphology with the similarity to papillary RCCs, immunohistochemical and morphological similarity to papillary RCCs can actually sometimes lead to a misdiagnosis of sarcomatoid papillary RCCs. But if you keep in mind that the spindle cell morphology in a mucinous tubular and spindle cell carcinoma is generally low grade, most often these tumors have a low grade morphology, then that would help in making the diagnosis. And as far as RCC, the immunomarker RCC is concerned, the literature on that has been very variable. So some studies have reported as low as 7% positivity, whereas some other studies have said almost 100% positivity. So again, the immunoprofile is not something that you would want to rely on to make a diagnosis here. The WHO recommends that the essential criteria for diagnosing this lesion would be the presence of anastomosing tubules with low-grade cuboidal cells, which merge into, again, low-grade spindle cell areas and that are set in a mucinous background. So that was your mucin stain. And as you can see, you've got all this quite a bit of this basophilic mucinous material in the stroma there. Now, looking at the pre-meeting analysis, you've got, one second. So you've got about very high consensus, mucinous tubular and spindle cell carcinoma, 95%. You had 14 participants saying papillary renal cell carcinoma. Now, as I've said, yes, morphologically and immunohistochemically, they are very similar, but molecularly different. So I'll let the audience decide on which way to vote on that one. Tubulocystic renal cell carcinomas. These tumors are macroscopically known to have a bubble wrap morphology. What we had here, as we were told in the macroscopic description, was our tumor was solid. And as far as the histology is concerned, tubulocystic tumors, RCCs, have tubules and cysts that are lined by large eosinophilic cells. You wouldn't really expect a mucinous background or spindle cell component in these tumors. So that again doesn't really fit. Now, oncocytic papillaries, we discussed this earlier, they have a very different and characteristic morphology to them. Then collecting duct carcinomas, these are high-grade tumors. They have a very high-grade morphology with these infiltrative glands. So that won't fit with the low-grade morphology that we saw in the tumor that we had. Then mixed epithelial and stromal tumors. Now, these tumors also have a stromal component and an epithelial component, but the architecture is different. So you'd get a phyllodes of the breast-like architecture, or you'd probably get thyroid follicles surrounded by stroma. But the stroma in a MEST is usually ovarian type. So that doesn't fit as well. And then as far as clear cell with fibromuscular septations or fibromyomatous stroma is concerned, these tumors tend to have a more clear cell morphology. So that wouldn't fit as well. So let's move on to the scoring. I'm going to skip the scorable bit because we had about 95% agreement and most people seem to be happy with the case. So let's go on directly to the scoring now. Okay, I think I'll move on. So mucinous tubular and spindle cell carcinoma gets a full mark. Renal cell papillary 0. Tubulocystic 0. Renal cell oncocytic papillary 0. Collecting duct 0. Renal cell with clear fibromuscular septation 0. Fibromyomatous stroma 0. Mixed epithelial stromal 0. Okay, so that brings us to AJ11, 74-year-old male, history of PT2 bladder cancer, no chemotherapy. Patient underwent a cystectomy, and macroscopically, the tumor appeared to extend to the outer muscularis propria and was very close to the perivesical fat. You had a supplementary question on staging as well. So that's your section of cystectomies from the cystectomy, and very clearly the surface seems to be fine, but you've got invasive tumor within the bladder wall, and it appears to be quite deeply invasive. So the surface was no obvious papillary tumor present, no dysplasia. The urothelium seemed to be hyperplastic, no definite atypia in the surface urothelium. And looking at a higher magnification at the tumor, you can see that it was quite poorly differentiated tumor, and these are bundles of muscularis propria there and tumor cells in between these bundles of muscle. So very pleomorphic, high grade and poorly differentiated tumor. Some possible single cell keratinization, but no definite keratinization there. No definite conventional urothelial urothelial component also present. So a high-grade pleomorphic, poorly differentiated tumor is what we had. The central area, there was a scar and some giant cells. Tumor was quite deeply invasive, lots of perineural invasion, definitely extending into the fat. Here you can see in the inset picture there was tumor sitting right next to adipose tissue. So definite perivesical fat infiltration. So some of us would have liked further immunostains and further blocks. And there were a few of us who said not suitable for EQA. So largely, looking at the free text comments, everybody said that this was a high-grade invasive urothelial carcinoma. But there was also some debate over with squamous differentiation or pure squamous cell carcinoma. Some pointed out that poorly differentiated urothelial, some said sarcomatoid. So there were many options that were put forward. Some said possible glandular differentiation. Someone even said giant cell urothelial carcinoma. And as far as the staging is concerned, in general, I think majority agreed that the tumor was infiltrating into perivesical fat. Now, it was originally called urothelial carcinoma, but as you can see, we've got about 13 subtypes and variants and divergent forms of urothelial carcinoma out here that people opted for. The good thing is that everybody thought that it was a urothelial carcinoma. Majority of us thought it was a urothelial carcinoma. So now, keeping in mind that there hasn't been any consensus on the subtype, and because the patients already had a cystectomy, so this doesn't really, there are no clinical implications to this. I'd like to suggest to the audience to score a full mark for all subtypes and divergent forms or variants of urothelial carcinoma as far as possible. And as far as pure squamous cell carcinoma is concerned, we had about 39 to 40 participants opting for that. So though we didn't have any obvious keratinization, we did have some intercellular bridges, I would say, and we did have some single cell keratinization. So a half a mark would be, I would like to suggest half a mark for this option. Metastatic tumor, that doesn't really fit. We knew there was a history of PT2 bladder cancer in the past as well, and this was a cystectomy. Adenocarcinoma, no obvious glandular areas seen there. The only thing is that I'd like to point out is that the last option, I think this was a mistake on the participants' part. They probably didn't realize that they meant to say high grade, but non-invasive was probably a mistake. So I think that wouldn't score as well because we clearly had an invasive tumor there. So I'd like to first start off with, was this case scorable? So we've got 100 people voting, and yes, it was scorable. So let's start off with the scoring then. This might take some time because everybody, most of the options were. Oh, yes, I should have pointed out that the full mark in this is actually a 0.5 because it's a split question with a supplementary as well. Okay, we've got about 95 participants, so I'll just move on. So TCC, no special type, scores 0.5. With squamous differentiation, 0.5. Poorly differentiated, 0.5. Squamous cell carcinoma pure scores a 0. TCC with trophoblastic scores a 0. Sarcomatoid scores a 0.25. With glandular differentiation scores a 0. Giant cell scores a 0. Actually, that's split. So, yeah, scores a 0. Metastatic tumor scores a 0. Adenocarcinoma, 0. TCC urothelial with giant cells scores a 0. Non-invasive papillary high-grade scores a 0. And enteric type scores a 0. Okay, so moving on to the supplementary question, please stage this tumor. So very high agreement on PT3A, almost 436 participants voting for that. A few went for PT3B, but generally, I think majority were in the PT3 sort of ballpark. PT2, 11 participants went for PT2, and I think 1 went for PT4. So because we've got such high agreement on that, I'll just move on to the scoring directly. We're running a little short of time, so I'm going to just... So PT2A scores a 0, PT2B scores a 0, PT3A scores a 0.5, 3B scores a 0, and PT4 scores a 0. So that brings us to my last case, and I'll just... so a 62-year-old male who presents with a mottled pearly lesion on the inner part of the foreskin, and this was an excisional biopsy. A melanate immunostain was also provided. So you had 3 sections of foreskin, and as you can see, there was a nodular invasive tumor present on, was definitely present there. Higher, looking at a higher magnification, the tumor was quite pleomorphic, poorly differentiated, lots of mitotic figures present there, and there was some brown pigment. In fact, quite a bit of brown pigment present there. So I'm sure by now, most of us have probably already come to a diagnosis, but then you had the melanate immunostain present, included as well. And the invasive tumor was definitely positive for melanate. But what was what was striking here was that the adjacent epidermis had a very contiguous, strong staining within it, and you had these single cells which you could see positively stained melanase cells, which showed upward pagetoid migration. So this helps to establish that this was a primary lesion. So these are the single atypical cells that you saw on the H&E, which were more obvious on the melanate stain. So generally, everybody was happy with the information that you had. Now, in the free text comments, everybody picked up that this was a malignant melanoma. I think it was quite clear on the H&E itself with the pigment there and the morphology that this was a melanoma. And then the melanase stain obviously helped with the diagnosis, but the melanase stain was added there to establish and emphasize that this was a primary lesion. The in situ component that you saw in the adjacent epidermis, which extended well beyond the invasive tumor, sort of reinforced that this was a primary malignant melanoma and not a metastatic melanoma, as we wanted to steer the discussion away from metastatic disease. Also, the melanA helps in deciding the subtype of the melanoma. So this was a superficial spreading with vertical growth phase, as the in situ component was well beyond the invasive component. The general one thing which everybody pointed out, and rightly so, we agree with that, is that they wouldn't report this independently and they'd like to report it jointly with a dermatopathologist, or at least take the opinion of a specialist dermatopathologist. So just something to be aware of, that yes, penile, scrotal and foreskin melanomas are to be reported using the guidelines set out by the cutaneous malignant melanoma dataset and not the penile cancer dataset. And the penile cancer dataset also recommends reporting these with a dermatopathologist. So as far as the meeting analysis is concerned, almost complete 99.4 agreement that this was a malignant melanoma. However, we still had 3 people opting for metastatic tumor. So I'll skip this bit because it was we've got really high consensus, and move on directly to the scoring. So I think we've got 98% agreement that this was a melanoma. Melanoma scores a full mark and metastatic tumor scores 0. So that brings me to the end of my 6 cases. Now I'll hand you over to Howell, who will take you through the prostate cases.
Thank you so much, Shalopa. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I've stopped sharing as well.
Try and share my screens. Wait, let me go through this.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Apologies, I should have done this sooner. Right, okay. Great, so unfortunately, John Dolmer can't be with us today, so he's asked me to present the prostate cases. So I'll do my best. We've got 3 cases. Hopefully they're all fairly straightforward, but we're also going to discuss a little bit about the percentage tumor nuclei as well. But again, I'm not a molecular pathologist. I can do my best just to explain as best as I can. So first case, 81-year-old male, PSA 16.4, there's PIRADS 5 lesion, and it was a template biopsy of the left anterior zone. And it was fairly clear that this was quite an extensively infiltrated prostate. We had 2 cores, and there was a large area of cancer. So significant amount of tumor involvement. In addition, certainly on low power and on a medium power, you can see the tumor infiltrating fat, extraprostatic extension. On a higher power, there was a sort of mixture of Gleason patterns. I think John's got a higher power as well. So we had a mixture of probably primary pattern 4, poorly formed glands, some reasonably well-formed glands, suggested pattern 3, but also some areas where the glands appear to be extremely poorly formed, single cells or suspicious of single cells as well, heading towards, well, a query of pattern 5 as well. So we had some sort of cribriform areas, some well-defined individual glands, so pattern 3, so a mixture of patterns really, 3, 4 and 5. Now, in addition to EPE and likely PNI as well. So again, fairly straightforward question. Immunohistochemistry was requested by 7 people. Apologies, the air ambulance is just landing outside my room, so I'll do my best to talk over them. So quite a few were querying about the Gleason score. Sort of, was it 4 + 5 = 9? Was it 4 + 3 = 7? But the vast majority thought this was cancer. Some people clearly not happy that the percentage tumour nuclei should be in the EQA. So I don't think we can get any better concordance than that. So 100% agreement that this was a prostate adenocarcinoma. It was actually submitted as grade group 5, 5 + 4 = 9. Okay, let's, and then the Gleason score, the Gleason grade group 2, 3, 4, and 5, quite a wide variety of split here before we go on to the scoring. So if you think of grade group 5, 46%, if you were even to add that to the 8s, then you wouldn't reach 70%. So it's probably fair enough if we were to say that the Gleason 3 + 4 = 7 would probably be incorrect, and 4 + 3 = 7 and higher appears to be incorrect. So all 3, I think, would, if the audience are happy with, we could accept as a score of 1. Bearing in mind there's a wide variety, and even when we look through the IBEX now. So first of all, is it scoreable? Hopefully this should be fairly straightforward. I'm just going to not wait too long. Is it fairly, yep, so 96%. And then the Gleason score then. So obviously this is 0.5, 0.25 or 0, depending on what you think. We've still got 50 people. I know it's a hot day. People want to get back to watch the chase. Okay, so if I can get to about 90. Good stuff. Yeah, we'll finish it there. So grade group 2, 0, 85. Yeah. Grade group 3, just about, yeah, 51%, 0.5. Gleason score of 8, yeah, 60%, and then 85%, yeah, so 0.5. So all those 3 score 0.5. Thank you to Alopa as well for sorting the IBEX plots out. So we ran this through IBEX. You can see it's hot in cancer throughout. And the suggested Gleason score was actually 4 + 4. However, there was a comment that they did look at an area and it was a sort of borderline 4 + 5 = 9. And it just drew one's attention on the heat map to a suspicious area of Gleason pattern 5. So heading more towards the 9, but equally, you know, there's plenty of 3 as well, but it's a tricky case for the Gleason scoring. Now, again, perineural invasion, okay, it's not scored, but just to highlight suspicious area. This was the first EQA circulation that we used a new item from the cancer data set to look at the percentage of tumour nuclei. Now, this has been added in the last year's data set. Basically, we now have, for certain patients with metastatic cancer who've relapsed, who've been treated with hormones and now relapsed, if they are BRCA mutated positive, there is a new drug, Laparib, that we can use. So the idea is that upfront, we can choose a representative block, which has got the most amount of tumour nuclei, or percentage of tumour nuclei, to save us time further down the line, whether it be months or years later, to having to go back and choose the best block for molecular analysis. So it's an upfront decision, bearing in mind that not all patients will need this, small number will need this, but hopefully it shouldn't be too much time for pathologists. But I do take the opinion, and there's been lots of debate about this, how much time we're spending, but it's to save time further down the line. So again, this was put in as a non-scoring part of question A13 in the free text box. We are looking, and we're almost there now, at in the future for the next EQA, having it as an obligatory question, still non-scoring at the start, but perhaps in the future when people are used to it, we can make it scoring. But I don't think we'll be too far away from that point. In the meeting reports, we did send out certain information for the participants. So there were 3 websites that you could go to, Molecular Pathology UK, all containing different, very, very useful information about how to assess the percentage of tumour nuclei and the importance of choosing the right block with the most amount of viable tissue in it. So I found these extremely useful, I have to say. And I would say I was coming at this as a generalist. I'm not a molecular pathologist. I'm new to this, just as we all are. The Molecular Pathology UK website had a very useful way of calculating the neoplastic cell percentage. So they did show quite useful. This is an adult granulosa cell tumour. It's quite appropriate for our EQA. But this is what the website was showing as a tumour showing 90 to 100% percentage of neoplastic cells. So there's very little stromal cells. There's very little inflammatory cells within this area. Whereas if we compare it to a metastatic ovarian mucinous cancer, metastatic to the omentum, we can now see some glands, malignant glands, but also lots and lots of lymphocytes packed together, fat, stroma, there's probably fibroblasts in here, endothelial cells of the blood vessels, so lots of other non-neoplastic cells, and certainly the lymphocytes are very small, so you can pack a lot of lymphocytes together, so there will be a lot more lymphocytes compared to the much larger nuclei of the cancer cells. So approximately 10% neoplastic cells compared to the non-neoplastic cells. So I found that website extremely useful. So if we go back to the responses, so again, this was in the free text box, and we thank you to all the people who participated and answered that. We had 454 responses to this question. So the vast majority thought it was 81 to 90% percentage tumour nuclei, but a split then between 93 for just a slightly lower, 70 to 80, and same amount really is 91 to 100. I'm very grateful to Dr. Philip Tanier of Birmingham, who it was a last minute decision by myself because we left it a bit last minute, but to be fair, he was very gracious with his time. And yesterday he had a look at this case, and with his team in Birmingham again, had a look. And to be fair, he did say it's assessing the percentage is not rocket science, but the consensus his team was between 70 to 80%. So it isn't quite the majority of what people were thinking, and perhaps, I know this is the first time we're doing it, perhaps we're slightly over or underestimating the amount of the non-neoplastic non-neoplastic cells, namely stromal, endothelial, the fat. There's not much inflammation in prostate, but if there was inflammation, those would be added up to just more than 20%, perhaps. Again, I would encourage people to look at those 3 websites and just to have a look at the YouTube video as well. It's very useful. I learned a lot doing that, and I probably learned that I'm overestimating the amount of tumour cells, and because possibly that's what we do as pathologists, we look at the tumour and perhaps sort of look at the stroma in the background slightly less. So that was very useful. What I would say, and Alopa has texted me, there are many, many comments as we're going along. It is difficult when we're doing the EQA to answer all the comments, but we will look at them obviously after the EQA, and we can respond to that in our post-meeting report, if you like. So apologies that we're unable to answer each different comment, each different question. So, but we'll do our best at the end of the EQA. AJ14, again, hopefully these will be fairly straightforward. We've got a PIRADS 5 lesion, low PSA, possibly capsular breach on the right side, and this was a biopsy of the right lobe. So we had 2 biopsies, 2 cores. Looks cellular at low level, low power. On higher power, we're starting to see a very dense inflammatory action, possibly even at low power, some nodular, possibly some granulomatous, but rather loose and poorly formed. And as we come to the higher power, we can see very few glands here, but this looks like a benign gland with inflammatory debris within it, surrounded by a very dense inflammatory component, eosinophils, lymphocytes and plasma cells, and then the very loose, sort of rather odd-looking granulomatous inflammation. So we were provided with immunohistochemistry, the high molecular weight, and it picks out the prostate glands that were not easily visible at low power. Quite nicely then. The high molecular weight just shows that these are positively stained. The racemase is negative. We weren't given a PSA or an NKX 3.1. Some wanted more immunohistochemistry related to that, really, the PSA and NKX 3.1. And not many comments, but just to show that this was a florid inflammatory infiltrate. Granulomatous prostatitis was the preferred diagnosis, but essentially a benign diagnosis, no evidence of tumour in the vast majority. Okay, so again, very good concordance, 99 thought it was benign, very small amount thought it was something else. So it should be eminently scoreable. We're almost at the end. So I'm just going to finish it there because it is scoreable. So 100%, yeah. And hopefully you can score this. I think we're losing a few who've gone on the school run, I think. So we will get to maybe 70, possibly, no, just about. So benign, 97%, 0.5. Obviously, this was part of the question, so it's out of 0.5. High-grade pin is a 0. Adenocarcinoma as a 0. Great. Okay. So last, oh, sorry, I should have said IBEX. Yeah, no. Confirmed what we thought on morphology, so very low likelihood of cancer. Supplementary question. Well, I think these must relate to the small number of people who thought it was adenocarcinoma. So is it scoreable? Hopefully it should be. I'm going to stop it there because it is, yeah. And then supplementary scoring. The vast majority thought it was not applicable for Gleason scoring. That's granulomatous prostatitis. Okay, I think we're losing a few people. So 0.5, yeah, is not applicable. Policing grade 1 or grade group 1, I should say. 0. Grade group 5, definitely a 0. So last question, almost there. We'll finish by 4 now. 80-year-old male, prostate core on the right side. And again, we had 2 decent cores. And I think the issue here was the vast majority of this looked simple benign glands, but we did have a couple of glands that have, certainly in the comments, they've mentioned these, showed infolding, sort of papillary infoldings. They look so quite condensed and low power. It did catch your eye. I think, could this be sort of pin? And again, we had another error in the other core, similar looking, quite compact, sort of villous snouts. But when you did go up on higher power, there wasn't the sort of high-grade nuclear features that one sees in high-grade pin. Apologies. So, immunohistochemistry favoured, always felt to be required. 13 people. And then again, some people thought that these were central zone morphology, fair enough. But some confusing it with high-grade pin, which didn't sort of appear to fit, in my opinion. So again, the vast majority of people favour this was pin. So it was benign, I apologise. 93%, high-grade pin favoured by around 32 people. So, and then some people wanted to go a little bit further, calling it an AIP. So, is it scoreable? Hopefully it is. I'll wait hopefully until we get to 50 and then, yeah, so it is scoreable. And then if you go to the scoring, so we've got 70 still online, benign as 0.5, and then high grade pin, yeah, so 68% thought it was 0, and then AIP, again, a 0. Fantastic. So, ran it through IBEX again. Thank you to for sorting that out, and again a low likelihood of adenocarcinoma. Sample question, well, not applicable 100%. So I think it's pretty scoreable, this question. Oh, I'm gonna go back. Actually, well, 100% scored that as not applicable, so everyone gets a 0.5 for that. I don't think John has put in the slide on that, apologies. So that's the end of Circulation AJ. Apologies that it's so warm today, but we've managed, I think, just to finish within the 2 hours. A couple of acknowledgements. Huge thank you again to Lauren for sorting everything out, for liaising with EQA Light, Leeds, so forth, and the 3 of us as well. To Mick and his team for the excellent support that we get, and also to Leeds and Path Portal for all the excellent IT help. And I would just mention the RC Path Portal IT team. They've been fantastic. So they respond to our emails and our concerns really, really quickly and sort everything out. So we'd like to keep the Path Portal going. To also consider going back as a third option, third server, to the Oxford platform. I think there was good feedback on that. We had to, just for logistics reasons, give up about 2 circulations ago, so we could revisit that. And again, huge thank you again to Philippe Tanier for his assistance with that case. I learned a lot from that. The next EQA meeting is actually online. It should be in person, as it usually happens in the autumn one, but there's the BDIAP, the joint BDIAP BAUP meeting this autumn. So we will move to online. Not sure when that's going to happen. We're just going to make sure we don't clash with the other EQAs. Lots of those are happening that time. I've just included it as the percentage tumour nuclei, just to give me a jog to my memory. We will
actually, Howell, some members have asked if you could share the links again. Or
I will do that. Yes, I will do that. We can, what now, or we'll probably
in the post-meeting report.
We'll do it in the post-meeting report, certainly. Yes, we will continue to ask the tumour percentage nuclear questions. It's in the data set, it's a requirement. There will be a learning curve, obviously. We don't want to make it immediately scoreable. We'll keep that online and then hopefully use further meetings just to gauge opinion, so that we can eventually add it at some point in the future as a scoreable case. But yeah, hopefully that will happen. So please, yeah, hopefully that's been an interesting 2 hours, and we can just get back before I lose another stone, I think, from sitting here in the intense heat. So thank you very much, and see you in the autumn.
Thank you.